We're going to start with that bill. Okay, we're live and ready.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. The Senate Finance Committee is now in session. We have 4 bills to hear this afternoon, and we'll begin with Senate Bill 94. Senator Eckhart, I guess.
We're starting with this.
Oh, all right. No, we won't either. We'll begin with Senate Bill 177. Okay. And
Did you let them in?
okay.
Nikki, did you let them in? Yeah.
All right. This is a departmental bill before our committee this afternoon. And we will hear from first Michael Burns, Executive Director of the Merlin Uninsured Employers Fund. And so, Mr. Burns, if you're available, you start now.
I am, Madam Chair, if you can hear me, but I don't know if you can hear.
Well, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Well, you're lucky. It's better to hear me than see me.
Okay.
So, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity to speak before the committee and also for sponsoring the legislation on behalf of the agency. I would like to urge the committee to please read the fiscal note and the written testimony. It will elaborate on the history of this situation. But briefly, in 2018, this agency learned of an issue involving the payment by Bethlehem Steel of workers for hearing loss and the subsequent payment by the state. Bethlehem Steel in 2003 went insolvent. At the time, Bethlehem Steel was the largest private employer in the state of Maryland. It was also self-insured for workers' compensation purposes. Pursuant to 9405 of Labor and Employment, this agency in that situation takes over the payment of workers' compensation claims. Because of an issue with the payment of these amounts to the Bethlehem Steel workers without claims, this agency and the administration worked out a plan to pay for the resolution of the issue and to get these workers treatment. The House altered that plan. They cut the funding and added language in Labor and Employment to 10314, the new 10314B5. This was added in the BRFA of 2019. There was no bill, there was no hearing. This agency was never contacted for any input on 10314B5. Frankly, whoever drafted the language in 10314B5 did not understand the issue and did not understand the ramifications of that language. The language added did not address the issue that we were trying to fix, nor did it deal with the cost of payments created and the confusion that's resulted in claims the agency can't currently raise defenses in has been another result. It's also caused delay in the treatment of these workers, which remains our top priority. This language that we've proposed will expedite our ability to treat the workers and to raise standard defenses to claims in these cases. I do want to point out, however, that the fiscal note costs are low. The agency has set aside a reserve of $6 million to pay for these possible claims going forward, which is a lot of money for this agency. We urge you to please pass this legislation so we can concentrate on helping these workers and in not forcing us to dispute claims instead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, hearing none, you must have done a good job. We'll go next.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I think Senator Klausmeyer and I did have a question or two.
Okay,
I
sure.
don't know if Senator, I'll let Senator Klausmeyer go first. You may have
Hi,
something.
Michael. Senator Klausmeyer. How are you?
Oh, hello, Senator. It's always good to see you.
Yeah. Well, is this change, is it going to be the first time, like through the Workers' Compensation Act would limit benefits to these folks? And are there other folks that got, besides Bethlehem Steel, that kind of got caught up into this?
No, actually, it's exactly the opposite. Because of this language, Bethlehem Steel workers have rights that no other worker in the state of Maryland in dealing with workers' compensation and this agency have. The way courts and various commissioners have viewed 1014B5 since, let me back up. Under 9405, this agency has the ability to pay the claims of the Bethlehem Steel workers. That was always the case, and that was never an issue. However, 10314B5 as drafted simply repeats what 9405 says, which doesn't make any sense. So what courts and commissioners have tried to do is figure out the intent of 10314B5, but since there was never a bill, there was never a hearing, and nobody quite knows what it's supposed to do, we've gotten various and sundry interpretations, one of which is to prevent the state of Maryland from raising the issue of limitations in these claims now. We are getting claims from people that claim that they retired from Bethlehem Steel 30 years ago, and now because they have hearing loss, it's related to their work, which would normally be barred by the statute of limitations, but because of 10314B5, we have not been allowed to raise that. Basically, what some people view 10314B5 as saying is UEF just pay the bills and that's it. So they actually have more rights than other workers. No other workers are affected by this.
Okay. Well, it just kind of came out of the clear blue, Michael. So that's why we're really, really concerned about it, because, you know, we've had so many issues and everything with UEF. So that's why I'm just really concerned, and I hope that doesn't screw anything up. But you say if this bill passes, then these folks will be taken care of.
Yes, they will, to the extent we, and my principal counsel from the Office of the Attorney General, Mr. David Stesh, is here to testify today, and he can explain to you from the legal point of view what's been going on much better than I can. Senator, my goal from the day I found out about this was to try to figure out a way to pay these guys so they could be taken care of. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And that's what we tried to do in 2019. And if I can get this language fixed to something more workable, we can settle the cases that can be settled, and we won't have to defend cases because there are other issues to get raised.
Yeah, and there's $6 million. The department has put $6 million in, you said?
That's what our reserve is for this. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so it's not going to go into the UEF fund then, so it has nothing to do with the.
Well, it's the reserve is set by the fund.
Okay.
And another related issue is, unlike uninsured employers, there is no source of revenue for these claims. When we pay for insolvent claims, absent money that may come from a bankruptcy court, and that ran out in Beth Steel 12 years ago, it comes straight out of the fund, and there is no possible way for us to raise any revenue to offset that.
Okay, all right. So Senator Feldman, go ahead. You have the floor now.
Well, Senator Feldman.
Yeah, so Mr. Burns, just a couple things, about the fiscal note, because as I understand your position, it's, there was no bill and there was a BRFA in 2019 that sort of changed the landscape in terms of the compensability of these claims from the Bethlehem workers. But I guess I have some documentation that's indicates that's not entirely the case. For example, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe your AG can speak to some of the legal issues here, but at least it appears that the Workers' Compensation Commission itself actually ruled that the Bethlehem Steel occupational deafness claims were in fact compensable before the BRFA was passed in 2019. Is that inaccurate, or is that the case, that even before BRFA, the Workers' Comp Commission actually made that ruling, and they based it on a legal estoppel claim? And I think it's specifically, at least the documentation I have here, says the steel workers were found to have relied on the actions of Bethlehem Steel Corp., the UEF, and UEF's agents. And then the Workers' Comp Commission then said these deafness claims were actually compensable. It was only after that that the General Assembly, through the BRFA, sort of got involved and made a claim. So do I have the sequence wrong? Because you were kind of implying it was at the BRFA stage when things were altered. Again, maybe the AG's office can correct anything that I've just said.
No, Senator. In fact, I want to thank you for bringing that point out because you just proved my point. You literally just proved my point. Under
Okay.
9405, the agency can pay on claims. If you go to the language of 10-314B5, this is the language that has been added to the statute. Hearing loss claims for retirees of the Bethlehem Steel Corporation. We can already pay hearing loss claims for Bethlehem Steel Corporation workers under 9405, as you just pointed out. This language does nothing to that language. It makes no sense as it's drafted.
Okay, Madam Chair, I think I'd like to hear maybe from the AG and then maybe the other side, because this is, I don't want to get too tangled up here in sort of a legal quagmire on sequence of events and, what doesn't make sense or does make sense. So
Okay, so
I'll yield back to you, I think, at this point.
Okay, we're about to do that now, so we'll go to David Cinch, the legal division, and you're on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm obviously been asked to address some of the illegal issues that have arisen in the legal community due to some confusion with 10-314B5. As Mr. Burns has testified, obviously, Best Steel employees, as former employees of an insolvent self-insurer, is already covered under 10-314B4. This change in the law in 2019 through the BRFA was 16 years after Best Steel became completely insolvent in 2003. There has been some confusion in the legal community of whether or not this abrogates the UEF's statute of limitations defense, specifically not only to paying hearing loss medical treatment, but also to defending indemnity claims that are filed multiple years after the fact. Under Maryland workers' compensation law, any hearing loss claimant has 2 years from a date of disablement to file a claim. There has been arguments by some in the legal community that 10-314B5, this change in 2019, basically carves out an exception that's only applicable to Best Steel employees. So in other words, every other claimant in the workers' comp universe in Maryland who has a hearing loss claim, if they didn't work for Best Steel, needs to file a claim within 2 years of the date of disablement. But because of this language, Best Steel employees are exempt from that. We don't believe that was the intent of the change in BRFA. We believe that not only the confusion in the legal community, I can verify that we've had 2 circuit court judges in the same jurisdiction come to different exact opposite interpretations of what 10-314B5 allows. One judge found, in fact, it does abrogate a limitations defense by the UEF that's only applicable to Best Steel claimants, including not just hearing loss, but also paying indemnity benefits many years after the fact. Another judge subsequently in the same court expressly disagreed with that conclusion and found that this change in the law does not abrogate our limitations defense. Senator Feldman is quite correct that this does not affect an estoppel argument that a claimant can make under a fact-specific case. And in fact, it was in April of 2019, shortly before this change, there was a few cases that the commission did find before 10-314B5 came in effect that the facts of those particular claims raised an estoppel that did not bar the claims from limitations. And again, I think that goes to the confusion of 10-314B5, that finding was before 10-314B5 under estoppel under a different part of the code that is fact specific. So I think there's some confusion with this that is totally unnecessary, because if the facts support an estoppel argument, the claimant can still make that argument. And again, the proposed change, I think the intent is to allow, there's many claimants, I think the history was that relied before Best Steel became insolvent were having their hearing loss paid for by Best Steel. And based on that, they may have not have filed claims. And this change allows us to continue to pay medical hearing aids and hearing loss treatment without the need of filing formal claims with the commission many years after the fact. However, if a claimant now 20 years later wants to seek indemnity benefits, we should still have a limitations defense to that argument. Again, they can make an estoppel argument. And also want to point out, even though Best Steel became insolvent many years ago, this would not apply to claims that are timely filed. we do have some situations that arise where a claimant for best deal retired many years ago, but their hearing loss disablement is fairly recent that reached the threshold to be incompensable under the Workers' Comp Act. And if a claim is filed within 2 years or timely filed, so it's not impacted by this change. But I think the language, it's simply universally said we have to pay all hearing loss claims for best deal employees of a company that became insolvent 16 years ago has certainly created confusion in the legal community and what was the intent was. And again, we have 2 different circuit court judges of the same jurisdiction coming to opposite conclusions on what was intent by that statute. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there other questions? All right. If not, then that ends the testimony. And we'll move on to the next bill. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee
Madam
members.
We're going next to Senate Bill 191. The Maryland Department of Commerce Transparency and Efficiency in Reporting Act. And representing the department is Jennifer Lahady.
Good afternoon, Chair Kelly, Vice Chair Feldman, and members of the committee. My name is Jen Lahat. I am the Managing Director for Policy, Research, and Government Affairs here at Commerce, and I am here today to present Senate Bill 191. This is a departmental bill which will streamline and consolidate the reporting requirements for Commerce's financial and tax incentive programs. Current reporting requirements call for similar or identical information about our programs to be provided in multiple reports per year to the governor, the General Assembly, and the public. For example, we have a consolidated incentives report, the Maryland Jobs Development Act report, which was created in 2013. And we also have additional individual program reports that are in existence in the enabling statutes for many of our programs. Commerce is currently required to report on our programs about 50 times per year, and that number does not include the one-time reports that the department is asked to submit each year. While these mandated reports are not identical, they are often substantially similar, which is duplicative and inefficient. Senate Bill 191 would streamline and consolidate the number of mandated reports the department is required to submit, while still requiring that Commerce provide full and thorough reports on each of its programs. To be clear, we absolutely agree that Commerce should be providing this information to the General Assembly, the governor, and the public, and we have no wish to change that requirement. We do believe, however, it can be done in a more efficient manner. To that end, Senate Bill 191 repeals the individual reporting requirements in the enabling statutes of Commerce's economic development, financing, and tax incentive programs, and consolidates those reporting requirements in section 2.5-109 of the Economic Development article, which is the existing Maryland Jobs Development Act report. Not only will this bill improve operational efficiency within Commerce, it will help ensure that data is consistent because multiple reports won't be filed at different times, and it will ensure we can report on our programs with clarity and transparency. And one additional feature that we've added in with this report is setting up a mechanism by which when a new program is created to be administered by the Department of Commerce, it will automatically then be included in the Jobs Development Act report that we submit each year. There will not be a need for new reporting requirements to be included in the enabling statute for that program. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions that the committee may have, and the department respectfully requests a favorable report on this bill.
Thank you. Are there questions? And note, colleagues, you also have written testimony from Don Fryer of the Greater Baltimore Committee, which is commensurate with the testimony that we've just heard. All right, if not, then that ends the testimony on that bill. And we'll go next to Senate Bill 196, Maryland Department of Health Overdose Report. And our oral testimony will come from Robin Rickard, the Opioid Operational Command Center.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Kelly and respective members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name, again, is Robin Rickard. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland's Opioid Operational Command Center. And On behalf of the OOCC, I just want to voice our support for Senate Bill 196, and I also supported written testimony. This bill will extend the sunset date that requires the Maryland Department of Health to submit an annual report regarding overdose risk factors by 2 years. We refer to the report as the Data-Informed Overdose Risk Mitigation, or DORM initiative. DORM, which was initiated following the passage of the Chapter 211 Act of 2018, entails creating risk profiles by linking overdose death records to various system-level data sets. Through better understanding who is at risk for overdose, we are able to identify and direct resources to critical areas and to better calibrate programs aimed at reducing overdose mortality. This work has been vitally important for informing statewide policy and strategy. It's helped to identify opportunities for new programs and interventions that can reduce overdose risks, such as highlighting the need to expand case management services for individuals who have experienced a non-fatal overdose, a population which is a much higher likelihood of suffering a fatal overdose. At a time when the state and country are experiencing historic fatal overdose rates, actionable information regarding populations at the greatest risk for an overdose can help save lives. While MDH was initially able to make progress on the initiative, resource challenges and complications related to COVID-19 created some delays. In recognition of the need to prioritize the work, the governor's office tasked the OOCC with overseeing the initiative last year. And in close partnership with the Behavioral Health Administration, we've made substantial progress in instituting a robust programmatic framework to support DORM. We're also working with several state departments to incorporate new data sets into the project, which will further strengthen the analysis. Extending the mandate for this report will allow MDH to finish implementing the necessary infrastructure to sustain the DORM initiative for years to come. And with that, we respectfully urge a favorable report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. While we have favorable testimony in written form from the Maryland Department of Health, from MedCog, from MACO, you might still have some other questions. Are there questions, colleagues? Okay, if not, then that ends the testimony on that bill. And we'll go next to Senate Bill 94. Okay, now Senator Eckhart.
Thank you very much, Chair Kelly and members of the Senate Finance Committee. Senator Addie Eckert here with the bill that you all passed unanimously last year. Senate Bill 94 would establish the Maryland Suicide Fatality Review Committee. Currently in the state, we have a number of review committees, but this one in particular is very important at this time with the increasing number of suicides, but with the increasing number of overdose deaths as well. We haven't had the information we need to get the kind of information that would be very useful in furthering suicide prevention. Successful suicides, oftentimes that individual leaves information behind that are clues to what's going to happen. But again, we don't always have access to that information. So this team would be representative of the various agencies who would have access to that data, who could pull it together to be able to make some recommendations that would then assist with the prevention and early intervention with future suicides. I'm pleased today to have with me a number of folks on a panel who've worked very diligently with us, all the members of the Governor's Commission on Suicide, and then Dr. Lanny Behrman, Dr. Paul Nesbitt, and Michael Eagle, as well, will be testifying to give you a little more information about the importance and significance of this bill. I think it's important to know what it is, why it's important, and what kind of outcome do we expect with this kind of an initiative, because it is an investment and we understand that the technology to be able to get the information we need does have some startup costs. So with that, I would like to then turn it over to Dr. Lanny Behrman.
Okay, before we do, is there any question at all for Senator Eckhart? Okay, then we're going to Alan Berman. Johns Hopkins School of Medicine.
Thank you, Chair Kelly and members of the Finance Committee. I'm Dr. Lanny Berman. I've been involved in the study of suicide for more than 50 years. I'm a past president of the American Association of Suicidology and twice was elected president of the International Association for Suicide Prevention. Both the United States Surgeon General and the World Health Organization have stated unequivocally that suicide is a serious public health problem and one that is largely preventable. Prevention clearly depends on the best possible data. SB 94 gives us just that. Maryland, as you know, already has a child fatality review team that investigates deaths of children under the age of 18, but that represents only 3% of all of Maryland's suicides. Maryland already has an overdose fatality review team that investigates drug overdose suicides among various other overdose deaths, but that represents only 12% of Maryland suicides. What that means is that 85% of Maryland suicide deaths are not reviewed by these committees, and we are desperately in need of information about these deaths. The very same arguments that led to the establishment and funding of those fatality review committees applies to the Suicide Fatality Review Committee. Maryland participates in the National Violent Death Reporting System, but that system does not provide us the kind of detailed information that the Suicide Fatality Review Committee would give us. It would tell us, that is, the Suicide Fatality Review Committee would tell us the reasons why the majority of those who die by suicide were not in treatment at the time of their death or even reasonably prior to their death. Therefore, it would help us define and potentially overcome barriers to care. The Suicide Fatality Committee would tell us about observed behaviors in the days prior to a suicide, and therefore would give us a much better understanding of warning signs. The Suicide Fatality Review Committee would help us understand the influence of social media on suicide, on gun storage practices by those who died by firearm suicide, the role of sexual orientation in suicide deaths, and most particularly, the social systems in which suicide decedents had contact in the last months of life, and therefore potential sites for intervention. Each and every suicide costs the state of Maryland an estimated $1.34 million, and child or adolescent suicides increased that to $1.84 million in direct and indirect costs. Were the Suicide Fatality Review Committee to result in the saving of about one life per year, it would pay for itself 3 to 4 times over. SB 94 is a life-saving opportunity. I've expanded on these comments, and I know that Commissioner Zeller and Dr. Nesset have also provided written testimony. I urge you to read through those testimonies, and I thank you so much for your attention, and I do hope you will support this.
Thank you. Are there questions for Dr. Berman? Okay, then we're going next to Dr. Paul Nestor. It's also Johns Hopkins Medicine.
Thanks for having me here today. So I'm a psychiatrist and I'm a suicide researcher like Dr. Berman at Johns Hopkins. I serve on the Baltimore City Council President's Suicide Prevention Work Group, the Executive Board of the Maryland Psychiatric Society, and I consult for the Opioid Fatality Review Committee and the Governor's Commission on Suicide Prevention. But my views here are my own, not representing Johns Hopkins. I'm here in support of SB 94 for the creation of a Suicide Fatality Review Committee. So suicide, as Dr. Berman mentioned, is a prominent and escalating cause of death in Maryland. Nationwide, it's the 10th leading cause of death, but the second leading cause of death for Americans under 40. And in Maryland, the suicide rate has climbed by 18% over the past 5 years. We're still waiting to measure the full impact on mental health of Marylanders left by the ongoing pandemic. Early data on that, which I published last year, show that the pandemic's impact on suicide was felt disproportionately by Black Marylanders, whose suicide rates almost doubled during the initial lockdowns of COVID in 2020. And when that data on Maryland pandemic suicides was first published, I found myself speaking to reporters and policymakers about the best way to interpret these suicide deaths. And I was asked how the pandemic might have contributed, like were these suicides related to grief from lost loved ones in the pandemic, or fear of illness or loneliness, isolation, job loss, all the things you might expect might have played a role. But I could only really guess. We didn't really know what did cause those suicides other than the numbers went up. And that's not very helpful if our goal is to prevent further suicides. Maybe they were unrelated to the pandemic or the mitigation measures. Traditionally, the most high-risk group, older white men, continue to have increasing suicide rates, but there are new vulnerable subpopulations. My study was on African Americans in Maryland, but also we're seeing youth suicides going up tremendously in Maryland and nationwide, especially in Maryland, actually, the last year or so. And we don't really know why that is. We just know the problem's worsening. The proposed Suicide Fatality Review Committee would have the authority to fully investigate these deaths in much greater detail than the state's currently able to do. The team would be able to characterize the final pathways to suicide, interpret these for proximal risk factors and missed points of intervention, and patterns of vulnerability that we could then produce reports on and recommendations for future suicide prevention efforts. Any prevention effort has to be informed by data to target interventions and monitor whether they succeed or not. The Suicide Fatality Review Committee is the best way to accomplish these goals and save lives in Maryland. And so I urge you to vote in favor of the creation of the Suicide Fatality Review Committee. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I have one question. I was looking this morning at C-SPAN and at a congressional committee that was dealing with the problem of negative algorithms cynically used by big tech companies, which are leading to a lot of negative outcomes, including to suicide, to rapes, all kinds of things. Is that something that you're worried about? Is that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, if I could answer. So the social media most likely plays a big role in the mental health of our population. In some ways, there might be positive roles it plays, in other ways, negative ways. And the algorithms are sort of designed to provoke emotional response. That's what keeps people clicking, as you probably heard on these reports. We don't know for sure how much social media influences suicide because we don't have that kind of information. We can look for correlations like, oh, look, there's more social media use in X population and they have a higher suicide rate, but correlation isn't necessarily causation. This sort of review committee would let us go in and look at these deaths and say, okay, and that includes talking to their doctors and their family members and friends that might have known these people who have died and say, listen, was there a change in their social media use? Did they talk about a role that social media played? Those interviews and the matching with data we get from other large data sets like hospital records, et cetera, that's how we figure out suicide and what the risk factors really are. And of course, then how to prevent it, how to address it. It's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Reedy.
All right, Senator Reedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here. And this is a very interesting bill. The chair just mentioned social media, and I agree that there are a lot of troubling things that have come out in recent months and about that. But I wanted to also ask about the effect of isolation on our young people. One of the things about suicide to me that is I'm glad to see we want to treat it almost basically like a murder investigation, even though the goal is not to cast blame on another person necessarily. The goal is to find out what happened and try to help others. Suicides are almost entirely totally preventable in most cases, but we don't always know we don't always know what's about to happen. So it's like if you knew what was about to happen and could predict it, they're a lot more preventable, and it's tragic. Any suicide is a tragedy. So I think this, I want to look at the bill closely, of course, as we go through our process, but I definitely applaud the intention and the effort. Can anybody talk, maybe Dr. Nestet, could you talk a little bit about, we've had a situation and a lot of it gets politicized, I know, but when kids are not able to be with other kids, when they're not in school, when there's been more isolation, and even before the COVID things, people were becoming more isolated. Can you talk about how important it is for us to have that human connection, especially for our kids?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a 6 and an 8-year-old who we're Zooming a lot to school. Absolutely. I think it plays a big role. Again, we can't know for sure until we investigate these deaths. And I actually don't want to spend too much time answering that because I know that Mike Eagle is also on this panel and he has a lot of thoughts on this from his perspective. But I will just say in brief, yeah, I think that's absolutely very likely a proximal risk factor for suicide. And I'd like to know more about that and look at the cases of kids who have died by suicide in the context of isolation and other things and see if there are ways we could have intervened that we missed the opportunity to.
Okay.
Senator Benson.
Senator Benson. You're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to ask the sponsor of the bill, you indicated that this bill was in last year. Why wasn't it enacted last year? Do you know? Why
I'm muted.
what happened?
It didn't make it through the House. There was no action when it got over to the House. So we are working on that as well this year. Thank you. Great question.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Then we're going to our next witness, Dr. Paul,
Michael Eagle.
Michael Eager, from Office of the Chief Examiner. Is this the medical examiner's office?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
All right. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Michael Eagle. I'm the Director of IT and the Custodian of Record for the Medical Examiner's Office. But again, I'm speaking on my personal experience here on this bill, Senate Bill 94. I'm retired Army, 20 years. I get a little emotional.
Take your time.
I'm a retired firefighter, 20 years. Been affected by suicide maybe 11 times. Soldiers, in great detail, kill themselves. Do we know why? We don't. I talked to Paul Nesmith about this, and we got to figure out. Firefighters kill themselves on a regular basis, and we don't know why. No warning, no system, nothing. And their lives go unanswered. This bill will stop this. As you said, did it affect children? Paul knows about this. In the start of the pandemic, youth programs deceased. They went dead. And so did a small boy. Why did I know about this small boy? Because he was a friend of my daughter's. He was at Peabody, a great musician. He played French horn. And he went every weekend to play with my daughter. Over and over again. Was this boy treated well at home? I don't think so, because he was ostracized. He played the French horn. He got away from the bullying and actions, from the isolation. So did you say, did the pandemic kill somebody? Yes. It killed a small little boy, African-American boy, that played the French horn. Senate Bill 94 will look at all these programs to stop these deaths. I had a fire captain, home, all alone, went into the room and shot himself in the head. Post-pandemic. Were there any clues? Yes, when we looked at this, there was many clues, but we didn't know, there was nothing in place to review these things so other firefighters can reach out to do something. Local 1311 has peer reviews and peer partnering that they reach out and talk about suicides, but that's about it. So this organization does this little part to talk about it. The military is slowly understanding suicides. And when you committed suicide, it was a show of weakness that you were less of a soldier, less of a man, less of a soldier. Now, finally, we're understanding that this post-traumatic stress disorder that we have affects so many people. Paul's committee, along with this Senate Bill 94, will stop this. We'll come up with some kind of plan, some program, and that's what we hope to get out of this. We hope to figure out a strategy to stop the death, to stop the young lives, the older lives, and the guys who are just trying, and young ladies that every day go out there and try to defend this country and save lives, that all of a sudden kill themselves. It gotta stop. And Senate Bill 94 will help. Thank you.
Thanks so very much. We feel your pain too, as you think about yourself as an agent trying to do good and you don't have the information that you need. in order to make good decisions. Okay, let's go next to Emily Allen, the Mental Health Association of Maryland.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Emily Allen. I'm the Public Policy Associate for the Mental Health Association of Maryland, here in support of SB 94. You have my written testimony, so I won't reiterate all of that information, but I would like to emphasize two things. There were 657 deaths by suicide in Maryland in 2019. And also, just to follow up on what Mr. Eagle was saying, more than 1 year in a row at this point, there have been more firefighter deaths by suicide than deaths in the line of duty. Suicide exists in all counties, in cities. It impacts all ages at all times of year. We know there are both risk and protective factors to suicide, and identifying these factors can help prevent suicide in Maryland and facilitate the change that we need to prevent and save lives. We owe it to the students in our schools, our neighbors that we don't know be struggling, our veterans, our military members, and the individuals with disabilities in our communities to take new steps to address this issue. And with that, you've gotten all of the data and information that you need from the previous presenters. So I thank you, and I urge a favorable report on SB 94.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, and then we will go finally to Kristen Harbison.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. You all know me, I'm Kristen Harbison. I come before you every year repeatedly and have for many years as a public interest advocate. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here today as a woman whose life has been shattered by suicide many times. For me, this bill is a bill about numbers. This is about, for me, that number is 5. 5 times people in my life have taken their own. There was the husband of a friend of mine at whose wedding I spoke. There was the colleague who played a critical role in my professional development. There was the college roommate who took her life 2 days before her best friend's wedding. There was my very close friend who I didn't know was calling to tell me goodbye when I thought she was calling to tell me she was going on vacation. And then most recently, there was the friend whose search, my best friend whose search I coordinated for 3 days in early January of 2020, while he was missing before he was found in the woods. And this is 5, this number 5 is what gives me the gruesome standing to deliver this testimony. And I'm very grateful to the sponsor for her leadership on this issue and for this committee and the Senate for passing this bill last year. But in addition to that 5, there is 500, although Ms. Allen mentioned that number is 675. That's the number of people whose lives were lost. But you have to multiply that number by 10. So you're looking at 6,700 people whose lives were the closest people to those numbers. The husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, parents, children, and best friends. The people who will spend the rest of their lives wondering what they could have done differently and adjusting to the permanent aching maw of grief left by the death of their loved ones. Beyond that, you have to multiply that by 10, because that's the extended circle of each of those people, the wider circle of family and friends, the neighbors, the coworkers, the classmates, the fellow congregants, all of whom will find themselves with a hole in their lives and find themselves wondering for the rest of their lives whether there was something they should have seen. But I also want to talk about, for me, what the number 1, because that is the person who last summer, when she posted on Facebook about wanting to rehome her dogs because she didn't feel like she had the capacity to take care of them.
I hate to butt in, but we are beyond your 4 minutes. If you could try to wrap.
Yes, ma'am. I was able to reach out to her because I had the information about that being a warning sign And so I don't know whether I was able to save her life, but I know I was able to take action in a way that I wasn't for those other 5. And so I thank you for your time. I'm sorry for running over, and I urge your favorable report.
Your
Thank you.
testimony was very important, and we appreciate it very much. It's important to hear from people who are experiencing the problems through their various professional lenses and through their personal contacts with family, friends, and neighbors. All right. I think that's it for. All right, and this is the end of our testimony for today. Thanks so much, everybody, and I'll see you on tomorrow. And Senator Eckhart, we will try to figure out what in the world we can do, if anything, to make sure that the House moves forward on this important